An 8-year-old boy who hadn't spoken in 3 years walked up to the scariest man in Texas and handed him a note with 5 desperate words. 24 hours later, 30 Harleys shook an elementary school to its foundation, and the bullies who'd tormented him learned what happens when you hurt someone under the protection of the Hell's Angels. Before we get into this story, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. If you've ever felt powerless, ever needed someone to stand up for you, or if you believe that real heroes don't always wear badges, hit that subscribe button. We're bringing you stories about loyalty, justice, and the people who show up when the system doesn't. Now let's get into the story of how one mute boy's desperate plea changed the lives of thousands of kids across America. Callie Mitchell hadn't spoken a word in 3 years. Not since the accident on Farm Road 1729, the 2-lane highway that cuts through the cotton fields outside Lubbock, Texas. Not since the day his father's pickup truck hit black ice that shouldn't have existed in West Texas, but did. Not since he woke up in University Medical Center with tubes in his throat and a silence in his chest that doctors couldn't explain with X-rays or CT scans. The vocal cords worked fine, they said. The trauma was somewhere else, somewhere deeper. Now, at 8 years old, Callie lived in a world where words were trapped behind a wall he couldn't climb. His mother, Maria, worked double shifts at the Covenant Hospital cafeteria, trying to keep their small rental house on the east side of Lubbock from slipping away. She'd come home smelling like industrial cleaners and reheated meatloaf, too exhausted to notice the new bruises on her son's arms. Too worn down to see the way he flinched when she asked about school. How could he tell her anyway? He had no voice. No way to explain that every morning felt like walking into a war zone. The problem started at the front gate of Slayton Elementary, a flat-roofed brick building that looked like every other underfunded Texas school. Sun-bleached, tired, forgotten. That's where Mason Greer and his crew waited. 5th graders, big for their age, cruel in the way that kids are when they've learned that power comes from making someone smaller than you. Mason was the ringleader, a stocky kid with expensive sneakers and a father who sat on the city council. The kind of kid who knew, even at 11, that rules didn't apply to him the way they applied to everyone else. Every morning, the routine was the same. Callie would get off the bus, clutching his backpack straps like a lifeline, and try to walk past them. Every morning, they'd form a wall. "Hey, mute boy," Mason would call out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Cat got your tongue? Or did your daddy take it with him when he died?" The other kids would laugh. Not because it was funny, but because laughing meant you weren't the target. Callie would try to push through, and that's when the shoving started. Hands on his chest, his backpack ripped off, his body hitting the dirt while teachers looked the other way, unwilling to confront the son of a man who controlled school budgets and job security. Callie had learned that America promised a lot of things: freedom, justice, protection. But for a mute kid on the east side of Lubbock, those promises felt like fairy tales. The system that was supposed to protect him had failed. The principal, Mr. Hawkins, had called it boys being boys when Maria finally scraped together the courage to complain. The teachers pretended not to see, and Callie kept silent, not because he chose to, but because he had to. But silence doesn't mean you stop screaming. It just means nobody hears you. Until the day Callie decided that if the system wouldn't help him, maybe the men who lived outside the system would. He'd seen them before, rolling through town on their Harleys, cuts covered in patches that told stories of war and brotherhood and a code that didn't bend for city councils or polite society. The Hell's Angels, Men who scared cops. Men who scared everyone. And on a hot Tuesday afternoon outside the Allsup's convenience store on Avenue Q, Callie saw one of them pumping gas into a blacked-out road king. Hunter Diaz, sergeant at arms, the kind of man mothers warned their children about. Scars on his knuckles, tattoos crawling up his neck, a face that said he'd seen things most people only had nightmares about. Callie's hands shook as he pulled out the piece of notebook paper he'd been carrying for 3 days, the words written in careful, desperate cursive. He didn't know if this would work, didn't know if Hunter would laugh at him or tell him to get lost, but he was out of options, out of hope, out of ways to make it stop. So he walked up to the scariest man in West Texas and tugged on his jeans. And when Hunter looked down, annoyed and ready to tell some kid to beat it, Callie held up the note. 5 words that would change everything. Will you walk me to school? Hunter Diaz had seen a lot in his 43 years. 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment, a knife fight in a Juarez alley that left him with the scar under his left eye, a decade riding with the Hells Angels, enforcing the code when words weren't enough. But standing in the parking lot of an Allsup's in Lubbock, Texas, reading a note written in a child's handwriting, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. His throat tighten. They hurt me because I can't talk. Will you walk me past them? The words were simple, desperate, written by someone who'd run out of options and decided that the scariest man at the gas station was somehow safer than going to school alone. Hunter looked down at the kid in the orange hoodie. Blonde hair, big eyes, skinny arms that had seen too many rough mornings. The kid wasn't crying, wasn't begging, just standing there, waiting for an answer, like he'd already prepared himself for rejection. Hunter folded the note carefully, slid it into his cut, and knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "What's your name, kid?" The boy pulled out another piece of paper already prepared. "Callie." Hunter nodded. "Callie. That's a good name." He paused, choosing his words carefully because he knew this moment mattered. "You know who I am?" Callie nodded. Everybody in Lubbock knew who Hunter Diaz was. The police knew. The rival clubs knew. The people who crossed the street when they saw his bike coming knew. "And you still asked me?" Hunter said. Another nod. This kid had guts. More than most grown men, Hunter knew. "All right, Callie. Here's what's going to happen. You tell me what school, what time, and I'll be there. But I'm not coming alone." Callie's eyes widened, not with fear, but with something else. Hope, maybe, or disbelief that someone had actually said yes. Hunter stood, his knees cracking, and ruffled the kid's hair. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." As Callie ran off, clutching his backpack, Hunter stood there for a moment, watching him disappear around the corner of Avenue Q. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Reaper, it's Hunt. Call church. We got a situation." Reaper, the chapter president, didn't ask questions. When your sergeant at arms says it's important, you listen. Within 30 minutes, word had spread through the Lubbock chapter. By nightfall, the clubhouse on East Broadway was packed. 15 brothers, all veterans, all men who'd been knocked down by life and learned to punch back. Hunter stood at the head of the table, the note laid out in front of him like evidence in a trial. "This kid can't talk," Hunter said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood what it meant to be voiceless. System failed him. School failed him. And now he's asking us, the guys everyone's scared of, to walk him to class. The room went quiet. Then Reaper, a Vietnam vet with a white beard and hands that had held brothers as they died in rice paddies, spoke up. "When do we ride?" It wasn't a question of if. It was never a question of if. The Brotherhood didn't abandon kids, didn't ignore cries for help. That's what separated them from the system that had failed Callie in the first place. By midnight, the plan was set. By sunrise, Lubbock was about to learn that when you hurt someone under the protection of the Hell's Angels, you've made a mistake you can't undo. Hunter went home that night, but he didn't sleep. He sat on his porch, drinking coffee, staring at the note. And he thought about every time he'd been knocked down, every time the system had looked the other way, every time he'd had to learn that justice doesn't come from courtrooms. It comes from people who refuse to let the weak get crushed. Tomorrow, Mason Greer and his crew were going to learn that lesson the hard way. 7 a.m. came fast. The sun was just starting to burn off the cool West Texas morning when the rumble started. Not loud at first, just a distant vibration like thunder on the horizon. But thunder doesn't come from a clear sky. Thunder doesn't shake windows and rattle coffee cups on kitchen tables. This was something else. Callie heard it first from his bedroom, a small space with peeling wallpaper and a poster of a fighter jet his dad had given him before the accident. He'd been awake since 5, too nervous to sleep, wondering if yesterday had been real or just another cruel joke. But then the sound grew, deeper, closer. The unmistakable growl of Harley-Davidson engines, multiple of them, moving in formation down the residential streets of East Lubbock. Maria burst into Callie's room, her face pale, still in her scrubs from the night shift. "Mijo, stay inside. Something's happening." But Callie wasn't scared. He ran to the window, pressed his face against the glass, and saw them. 30 motorcycles rolling down their street in perfect formation, chrome glinting in the morning light, leather cuts adorned with patches that told stories of war and brotherhood, and a code that didn't bend. At the front, on a blacked-out Road King, was Hunter Diaz. He saw Callie in the window and gave a single nod. Then he raised his hand, and the entire pack stopped. Engines idling, waiting. Maria grabbed Callie's shoulder, her voice shaking. "What is this? What did you do?" But Callie just grabbed his backpack, pulled on his orange hoodie, and ran for the door. His mother tried to stop him, but then she saw Hunter dismount and walk toward their house. He moved with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to explain himself, who'd earned the right to command respect just by showing up. Hunter stopped at the porch steps. "Ma'am, I'm Hunter Diaz. Your son asked me to walk him to school." Maria looked at this man, this terrifying, tattooed, battle-scarred man, and saw something unexpected in his eyes. Kindness, protection, the look of someone who understood what it meant to stand between a kid and the monsters. "He's being bullied," Hunter said simply. "System's not helping. So we are." Maria's hands were shaking, but she nodded. Because what else could she do? Call the police on the people actually helping her son? Tell them to leave when the school sure as hell wasn't protecting him? Hunter looked down at Callie. "You ready?" Callie nodded, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. Hunter gestured to his bike. "Ever ridden before?" Callie shook his head. "First time for everything." "Don't worry, kid. You're safe." He helped Callie onto the back of the Road King, showed him where to hold on, made sure his grip was firm. Then he looked back at the pack, 30 brothers waiting for the signal, and raised his hand. The engines roared to life, a symphony of power and purpose that echoed through the neighborhood like a declaration of war. And as they rolled out, with Callie clinging to Hunter's back, the kid felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not fear, not shame, power. For the first time since the accident, since the silence took over, since Mason Greer made his life hell, Callie felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The ride through Lubbock was slow, deliberate. Not a race, a procession. Cars pulled over, people stopped on sidewalks and stared. Some pulled out phones. Others just watched in awe as this wall of leather and chrome moved through the streets like a force of nature. And at the center of it all, an 8-year-old boy who couldn't speak, but was finally being heard. Slayton Elementary sat on the edge of town, a low brick building surrounded by chain-link fence and a parking lot that had seen better days. By 7:30, the drop-off lane was packed with minivans and SUVs, parents in yoga pants and business casual, kids with backpacks covered in superhero logos. Normal, safe, boring. Then the rumble started. At first, people thought it was construction, maybe road work on the highway. But construction doesn't get louder, doesn't shake the ground like an earthquake rolling in from the plains. The first bike appeared around the corner, and conversations stopped. Coffee cups paused mid-sip. A teacher dropping off her own kids froze with her hand on the door handle. 30 Harleys rolled into the parking lot in perfect formation, 2 by 2, filling the space like an occupying force. The engines were deafening, a wall of sound that made it impossible to think, impossible to ignore. Parents grabbed their kids. Some locked their car doors. One woman fumbled for her phone, probably dialing 911. But the bikers weren't there for them. They parked in a line, cuts on full display. And then, as if choreographed, they all dismounted at once. 30 men, veterans, every single one of them. Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. Men who'd served their country and found a second family on 2 wheels. At the front gate, Mason Greer and his crew were already in position, waiting for their morning target. But today, Callie wasn't alone. Hunter helped him off the bike, made sure his backpack was secure, and then did something unexpected. He knelt down, looked Callie in the eyes, and said, "You walk in there with your head up. You understand? You got nothing to be ashamed of." Callie nodded, his hands trembling, but his jaw set. Hunter stood, put a hand on Callie's shoulder, and together they walked toward the gate. Behind them, 29 brothers followed. Not running, not aggressive, just walking, a silent wall of protection that made every parent, every teacher, every kid in that parking lot stop and stare. Mason saw them coming. His face went from cocky to confused to terrified in about 3 seconds. His crew, the same kids who'd laughed and shoved and made Callie's life hell, suddenly found reasons to look at the ground. Because when you're 11 years old and 30 bikers are walking straight toward you, all that fake bravado evaporates real quick. Hunter stopped about 10 feet from Mason. Didn't say a word at first. Just stood there, this mountain of a man with scars and ink and a presence that made the air feel heavier. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm, but carrying the kind of authority that comes from leading men in combat. "You, Mason?" The kid nodded, his face white. "This is Callie," Hunter said, gesturing to the boy beside him. "He's with us now. That means he's protected. That means if one more bruise shows up on him, if one more kid laughs at him, if one more person makes him feel small, we're going to have a conversation, you and me. You understand?" Mason nodded so fast his head looked like it might fall off. "Good," Hunter said. Then he did something that would echo through Slayton Elementary for years. He extended his hand to Callie. Not a handshake like you'd give a kid. A real handshake. The kind you give a brother. An equal. And Callie took it. The message was clear. This kid wasn't alone anymore. He had backup. The kind of backup that didn't need permission slips or school board approval. The kind that showed up at dawn and made bullies remember that respect isn't optional. Hunter turned to the gathered crowd. The parents clutching their lattes. The teachers standing frozen by the entrance. The principal who'd just stepped outside and looked like he might have a heart attack. "We're not here to cause trouble," Hunter said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "We're here because this kid needed help and nobody gave it to him. So we did. That's what we do." And with that, the brotherhood turned and walked back to their bikes, leaving Callie standing at the gate with his head held high for the first time in 3 years. Principal Hawkins didn't know what to do. He stood in the parking lot, watching 30 Harleys idle like a pack of wolves waiting for orders, and felt the weight of a decision he'd been avoiding for months. Ignore it. And Mason's father, Councilman Greer, would make his life hell. Address it, and he'd have to admit that the school had failed a kid who needed protection. But the bikers weren't giving him a choice. They weren't leaving until Callie was safely inside. Hunter waited by his bike, arms crossed, watching. Not threatening, just present. A reminder that some problems don't go away just because you ignore them. One of the other bikers, a man called Reaper with a white beard and a Vietnam patch on his cut, walked over to Hawkins. "You the principal?" Hawkins nodded, trying to find his voice. "You know about the kid getting bullied?" Another nod. Reaper tilted his head. "And you did nothing?" Hawkins opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain that Mason's father was influential, that the school board had pressures, that it was complicated. But Reaper held up a hand. "Save it. We've all heard the excuses before. System's broken, we get it. That's why we're here." He gestured to the brotherhood. "Every man standing behind me served this country. We fought for freedom, for justice, for kids to feel safe going to school, and when we came home, a lot of us found out those words don't mean much when you're up against money and power." Hawkins felt his face flush. Because Reaper was right. He'd chosen the easy path, keep the councilman happy, keep his job secure. And in doing so, he'd let an 8-year-old boy get tormented every single day. "Here's what's going to happen," Reaper continued, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to make sure Callie Mitchell is safe in this school. No more bullying, no more looking the other way. And if we hear otherwise, we'll be back. Not to hurt anyone, not to cause trouble, just to remind you that some of us still believe in doing what's right, even when it's hard." Hawkins nodded slowly. What else could he do? The bikers had done in one morning what he'd failed to do in months. They'd protected a kid. Inside the school, Callie walked through the hallways with a confidence he didn't know he had. Kids stared, whispered, but not the cruel kind of whispers, the confused kind, the "did you see what just happened" kind. Mason and his crew were nowhere to be found. Word had spread fast. The mute kid had backup now. The kind you don't mess with. Callie's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman who'd always tried to help but didn't have the power to stop the bullying, pulled him aside. "Callie, are you okay?" He nodded, and for the first time he smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one. but it was there. At lunch, something changed. The table where Callie usually sat alone, the spot in the corner where invisible kids hide, suddenly had company. 3 kids from his grade, kids who'd never spoken to him before, sat down. One of them, a girl named Emma, said, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. Are those guys really your friends?" Callie pulled out his notebook and wrote, "They're my brothers." And he meant it, because that's what the brotherhood had become. Not just protection, family. Outside, the bikes were long gone, rolling back to the clubhouse on East Broadway. But their presence lingered like smoke. The parking lot felt different. The school felt different. And Callie Mitchell, the boy who hadn't spoken in 3 years, finally felt like maybe his silence didn't make him weak. Maybe it just meant he'd learned to scream in a different way. Hunter sat at the clubhouse later that afternoon, the note still in his cut, and thought about the look on Callie's face when he'd shaken his hand. That's why they did this. Not for recognition, not for thanks, but because when the system fails, someone has to step up. And if that someone wears leather and rides a Harley, so be it. America promised protection. The Brotherhood delivered it. The story didn't stay local. By noon, someone's cell phone video had gone viral. 30 Harleys escorting a bullied kid to school. The comments section exploded. Some people called it vigilante justice. Others called it beautiful. News stations in Lubbock picked it up by the evening broadcast. Hell's Angels escort mute boy to school ran as the lead story on Channel 11, complete with shaky footage of the bikes rolling into the parking lot and Hunter walking Callie through the gate. The reporter tried to get a statement from the club, but Hunter declined. "We don't do this for press," he told them. "We do it because it's right." But the attention brought something unexpected: support. By the next morning, the clubhouse phone was ringing off the hook. Parents from across West Texas calling, asking if the Brotherhood could help their kids too. A mother in Amarillo whose daughter was being harassed. A father in Midland whose son was getting jumped after school. A grandmother in Abilene whose grandson was too scared to ride the bus. The system was failing kids everywhere. And suddenly, people were realizing that maybe the men in leather cuts weren't the villains. Maybe they were the ones who actually gave a damn. Reaper called another church meeting. The table was packed, and the energy was different. Focused. Purposeful. "We've got a decision to make," Reaper said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "We can let this be a one-time thing, or we can make it bigger. Start a program. Escort runs for bullied kids, protection for the ones the system forgets." The vote was unanimous. Within a week, the Lubbock chapter launched The Silent Riders, a program dedicated to escorting kids who needed protection. No questions asked. No payment required. Just brotherhood. Callie became the program's first official member. Not as a biker, he was 8, but as a symbol. The kid who'd been brave enough to ask for help from the scariest men in town. Hunter gave him a small patch, custom-made, that read "Little Brother" with the club's colors. Callie wore it on his backpack like a badge of honor. And every morning, Hunter made sure to ride by Callie's street just to let the kid know he wasn't alone. The bond between them grew. Hunter, who'd never had kids of his own, found himself teaching Callie things. How to change a bike's oil. How to throw a punch properly if he ever needed to. How to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock you down. Maria, Callie's mother, didn't know how to thank them. She invited Hunter over for dinner one night, a simple meal of carne asada and rice, and tried to find the words. "You gave my son his life back," she said, tears in her eyes. Hunter shook his head. Your son already had it in him. We just reminded him." But Maria knew better. The system had failed her boy. The school had failed him. And these men, these rough, tattooed, leather-wearing men that society feared, had stepped up when no one else would. The program grew. Within a month, chapters across Texas were replicating it. Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso. Everywhere, kids who'd been bullied, harassed, or forgotten were getting escorts from men who understood what it meant to fight for the weak. The media tried to spin it as controversial, but the families knew the truth. When the system fails, the brotherhood shows up. And as Callie walked through the halls of Slayton Elementary, no longer invisible, no longer afraid, he carried with him the knowledge that some heroes don't wear capes or badges. They wear leather cuts and ride Harleys. And when you need them most, they show up at dawn. 3 months after that first morning, Callie did something nobody expected. He spoke, not to a doctor, not in therapy, but to Hunter, sitting in the clubhouse garage while they worked on a carburetor. "Thank you." 2 words, quiet, raspy from years of silence, but clear. Hunter's hands froze on the wrench. He looked at Callie, this kid who'd been mute for 3 years, and felt something break open in his chest. "Say that again," Hunter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," Callie repeated, louder this time. And then, like a dam breaking, more words came. "For helping me, for being there, for making them stop." Hunter set down the wrench and knelt in front of Callie, the same way he had that first day at the gas station. "Kid, you don't thank me. You hear me? You found your voice because you were brave enough to ask for help. That's all you. Not me, not the brothers. You." But Callie shook his head. "I couldn't do it alone." Hunter smiled, a rare thing for a man who'd seen too much darkness. "None of us can, Callie. That's why we ride together. That's what brotherhood means. Nobody fights alone." Word spread through the clubhouse fast. The mute kid was talking. Brothers came out of the woodwork to hear it for themselves, and when Callie said hello to each of them, grown men, veterans who'd faced enemy fire and death, got teary-eyed. Maria got the call at work and left her shift early, rushing to the clubhouse with her heart pounding. When she saw her son actually speaking, she collapsed into Hunter's arms, sobbing. "I thought I'd never hear his voice again," she cried. Hunter held her steady. He just needed a reason, needed to know it was safe. That night, the brotherhood threw a small celebration. Nothing fancy. Just burgers on the grill, cold beers, and a kid who'd found his voice surrounded by men who'd helped him find it. Callie told them about the accident, about waking up silent, about the fear that lived in his chest every morning before school. And the brothers listened, really listened, because that's what family does. Reaper stood up, raising a beer. "To Callie, the bravest kid in West Texas." The brothers echoed the toast, and Callie, sitting between Hunter and Maria, felt something he hadn't felt since before the accident. Whole. As the months turned into a year, Callie's transformation was complete. He wasn't the mute kid anymore. He was the kid with the Hell's Angels watching his back. Mason Greer had transferred schools. His father quietly moved him after realizing the brotherhood wasn't going away. The bullying stopped, not just for Callie but school-wide, because everyone knew now, if you mess with the weak, you answer to the strong. Callie started speaking in class, slowly at first, then more confidently. His grades improved. He made friends. He even joined the school's robotics club, something he'd been too scared to try before. And every Friday, without fail, Hunter picked him up after school, and they'd ride. Not far, just around Lubbock, wind in their faces, the rumble of the engine beneath them. Those rides became sacred. A reminder that silence didn't define Callie anymore, that he'd found his voice not just in words, but in the roar of a Harley and the loyalty of men who refused to let him fall. On Callie's 9th birthday, the Brotherhood threw him a party at the clubhouse. Cake, presents, and something special. A custom leather vest, kid-sized, with a patch that read "Little Brother" and the club's colors. Hunter helped him put it on, and Callie looked in the mirror, seeing not a victim, but a survivor, a fighter. "You earned this," Hunter said, "not because you're tough, but because you were brave enough to ask for help. That's the hardest thing any of us ever do." Callie hugged him, and in that moment, the Brotherhood understood something powerful. They didn't just protect kids. They gave them a reason to believe that the world, broken as it was, still had people worth fighting for. And sometimes, those people wore leather and rode into the sunrise. The Silent Riders program became a movement. What started in Lubbock spread across Texas, then into Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas. Chapters everywhere were getting calls from desperate parents, kids who needed protection, families the system had abandoned. The Brotherhood responded every time. Escort runs became weekly events, toy drives, school supply donations, mentorship programs where veterans taught at-risk kids how to rebuild bikes, giving them skills and purpose. The media couldn't ignore it anymore. What had started as a controversial viral video had become something undeniable, proof that the men society feared were actually the ones doing the most good. Hunter became the unofficial face of the program, doing interviews despite hating the attention. "People think we're criminals," he told a reporter from the Dallas Morning News. "But every man in this club served his country. We've got Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, men who've sacrificed more than most people will ever know. And when we came home, we found a system that didn't care. So we built our own, a brotherhood that shows up when nobody else will." The article ran front page, and donations started pouring in. Money for gas, for patches, for the logistics of organizing escort runs across multiple states. The Brotherhood didn't want charity, but they accepted it, because it meant they could help more kids. Callie's story became the centerpiece. News outlets wanted interviews, but Maria and Hunter shielded him from most of it. "He's a kid," Hunter said firmly when a producer from Good Morning America called. "Not a prop." But Callie did agree to one interview, local, with a reporter he trusted. He sat beside Hunter, wearing his little brother vest, and spoke clearly about what the Brotherhood had done for him. "They didn't just stop the bullies," Callie said, his voice steady. "They showed me that asking for help isn't weak. It's the bravest thing you can do." The clip went viral, racking up millions of views, and suddenly kids across America were writing letters to their local MC chapters, asking for help. Not every chapter participated. Some thought it was too much attention, too much risk. But the ones who did found something they hadn't expected: purpose beyond the ride. Veterans who'd struggled with PTSD found healing in protecting kids. Brothers who'd felt lost after leaving the service found a new mission. The Silent Riders gave them a reason to wake up, to show up, to be the men they'd always believed they could be. Hunter saw it in his own chapter. Brothers who'd been drinking too much, fighting too much, suddenly had direction. They weren't just riding for themselves anymore. They were riding for kids like Callie, for families like Maria's, for the ones the system forgot. At a national MC rally in Sturgis, South Dakota, the Silent Riders program was officially recognized. Chapters from across the country pledged support, and a fund was established to expand the program nationwide. Hunter stood on stage, uncomfortable but determined, and spoke to thousands of bikers. We're not asking for thanks. We're not asking for glory. We're asking you to show up. When a kid needs help, when the system fails, when nobody else will stand in the gap, that's what we do. That's who we are. Brotherhood means something. Let's prove it. The crowd erupted, and in that moment, the Silent Riders became more than a program. It became a legacy. Back in Lubbock, Callie continued to grow. He was 10 now, speaking fluently, thriving in school. But he never forgot where he came from. Every year on the anniversary of that first ride, he and Hunter led a memorial escort for kids who'd been lost to bullying, suicide, violence, the tragedies that happen when nobody listens. Dozens of bikes would roll through Lubbock, stopping at schools, reminding everyone that silence kills. But so does standing by and doing nothing. And as Callie rode on the back of Hunter's bike, wearing his little brother vest, he understood something fundamental. He'd been saved not by the system, but by men who refused to let the system's failures define the outcome, men who showed up when it mattered, men who proved that brotherhood isn't just a word, it's a promise. And the Hell's Angels keep their promises. 5 years after that first morning, Callie Mitchell stood at the gates of Slayton Elementary as a 13-year-old volunteer. The Silent Riders program had grown so large that they needed coordinators, people who understood what it meant to be on the other side of the bullying. Callie was perfect for it. He'd started a peer mentorship program at his middle school, teaching younger kids that asking for help wasn't weakness, that your voice, whether spoken or written, mattered. He wore his little brother patch proudly, and when new kids joined the program, they looked up to him, the boy who'd been voiceless and found his roar. Hunter was still sergeant at arms, still the first call when a kid needed help, but he was also something else now, Callie's godfather. Maria had asked him 2 years ago at a quiet dinner if he'd take on that role. "You already are," she'd said. "Might as well make it official." Hunter had accepted, honored in a way he couldn't put into words. He'd never had kids of his own, never thought he'd be the fatherly type. But Callie had changed that. Taught him that protection wasn't just about standing between someone and danger. It was about showing up consistently, even when the cameras were gone and the attention had faded. The brotherhood had changed too. The Silent Riders program had brought a new generation into the club. Veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, men who'd served in the post-9/11 wars and came home to a country that didn't quite know what to do with them. They found purpose on 2 wheels, escorting kids, protecting the vulnerable, standing up when the system wouldn't. The culture shifted. The club was still tough, still commanded respect. But now they were known for more than just being feared. They were known for showing up. Mason Greer, the bully who'd started it all, had his own journey. He'd transferred schools, struggled for a while, and eventually found himself at a crossroads when he turned 16. He'd made mistakes, hurt people, and one day he showed up at the clubhouse, nervously asking to speak with Hunter. The brothers were skeptical, but Hunter agreed. They sat outside under the Texas sun, and Mason apologized. Really apologized. "I was a punk kid who thought power meant making people smaller," Mason said. I'm sorry. For what I did to Callie. For all of it." Hunter listened, then nodded. "Apologies are a start. But what are you going to do about it?" Mason didn't have an answer then, but 6 months later, he volunteered with the Silent Riders. Started escorting kids himself, making amends by protecting the ones who reminded him of the boy he'd tormented. Callie forgave him, not because Mason deserved it, but because Callie had learned something powerful from the brotherhood. Holding on to anger only hurts you. Forgiveness is freedom. They'd never be friends, but they worked together. Two kids from opposite sides of a painful story, now united in trying to make sure no other kid went through what Callie had. The program expanded beyond bullying. It became a full support system. Mentorship, tutoring, job training for at-risk teens. The Brotherhood partnered with veteran organizations, schools, and community centers. They proved that when people wrote off as dangerous, actually get the chance to show their character, they change lives. On a warm spring morning, Hunter and Callie rode out to the spot on Farm Road 1729 where the accident had happened. The place where Callie's father had died, where the silence had begun. They stood there, helmets off, wind in their faces. "You think he'd be proud?" Callie asked quietly. Hunter put a hand on his shoulder. "Kid, your dad would be beyond proud. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that's helping thousands of kids. That's not just strength, that's legacy." Callie nodded, tears on his cheeks, and whispered something to the wind, a message for his father, a promise that his silence had been broken and his voice was being used for good. As they rode back to Lubbock, the sun setting over the plains, Callie thought about how far he'd come. From a terrified, mute kid to a young man with purpose. He thought about the note he'd handed Hunter 5 years ago, the desperate plea that had started everything. And he realized something profound. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. And sometimes the people who look the scariest are the ones with the biggest hearts. The Hell's Angels had given him more than protection. They'd given him family, a voice, a future. And as the rumble of the Harley echoed across the Texas plains, Callie understood that brotherhood wasn't just about blood or patches or bikes. It was about showing up when the world didn't. It was about standing in the gap. It was about proving that even in a broken system there are still people who refuse to let the innocent fall. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. If you believe that protecting the vulnerable is what real strength looks like, then like and share this story. Let it reach every parent with a bullied kid, every person who thinks bikers are just criminals, every child who feels voiceless and alone. Subscribe now for more stories like this. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.